Now it's going to be my pleasure to introduce our two pastoral speakers for this evening. First, we will be hearing from our own youth pastor here at Crossroad Community Church, Pastor Andrew Betts. He is a dynamic leader with a heart for youth and a passion to see all of his teens that are under his charge to be all that they can be, physically, emotionally, and most importantly, spiritually. And I personally enjoy every conversation that we get to have in the hall here at church during the week, and I know that you're going to be glad that you've had the opportunity to hear from him this evening as well. Pastor Andrew.
Hey, Ken, how close am I allowed to get? Can I get in the splash zone right up there? All right. I like to get closer. Yeah, with our youth students, every single Monday we see how they're seated and we force them all to move much closer because I like to feel a little more connected. So I have done youth ministry for quite some time now. It's been 13 years, and teens change so quickly. If you think you have teens figured out, wait till next year. And so many things radically changing. Just to give you one example, we know a lot of bad things that teens get into, but just in the last year, I don't know if you've seen recently some of the articles on the vaping stats. Through the roof. The one that came out this week, on average, I guess, is 27% of teens in the last month have been vaping. 27%. Radically different, where if you thought you had teens figured out 2 years ago, you don't even know what vaping is. You've never heard of a Juul. You don't know what juuling is. You don't know that they can smoke little things that look like USB devices that have flavors of mango and mint, and that they're using marijuana through these devices. I've gotten calls about people in the hospital because of their usage, and most people have no idea because teen culture changes and adapts so quickly. And so it's things we need to know. So if you want to know kind of where teen culture is, that's what I'm talking about today. Just so you guys it'll be quick. If you want the longer version, you can come out to the breakout session tomorrow, and we'll connect that with some other things connected with identity. But what we have to know is that the teen culture and what you're used to, what you've identified with as teen culture, has changed. So we need to acknowledge that there's certainly a difference, and if you follow the news cycle, the 24-hour news cycle that we have going all the time, within the last month, they came out with a survey that really did a great job of highlighting the differences between this generation and the teenage generation. So I don't know if some of you may have heard about it. The highlights were about patriotism and how it's so different with millennials, Generation Z, and teenagers. But I'm going to go over some more details of the survey that were left out of a lot of the news articles. And just so you get a grasp and understand what is important to teens has changed radically. It's not just kids being kids. The kids are different. They're absolutely different. And so the one area, the biggest discrepancy, and the survey is between 55 and up versus millennials and Generation Z. But the biggest discrepancy in what they consider important is how you view your country. Patriotism. Massive gap, where if you're looking at teenagers today, how they view their country and how you viewed your country as a teenager, they have nothing in common anymore. And so what does that look like when these, which includes millennials, but when these teenagers, when they grow up and they're the ones making decisions for a country they don't even like? So understand. So they're being. What is causing this is that kids believe what they're told, and so that they're being taught all the terrible things in American history. And listen, my degree, my background is in history. Let me tell you, America has done some terrible things, but they've also done more fantastic things than any other nation I've ever heard of. And they don't know that. They don't know that when they're hating on their own country, that they're in the greatest country in the world. They don't realize that. These are our teenagers. They're not taught what it is, what is truth about our own country. And so then they base decisions, they base their reasoning on lies about what should be something so solid in their identity. They don't have it because they don't know what it is to be an American anymore. There is no identity. And so that's just one area of a major difference, is the common ground that parents and teenagers could always stand on is that, hey, America, we believe in it, we're protected, it has faults, but there's nothing better. That America first mentality, that sacrifice for a nation mentality is gone within the teens. Not 100%, but understand, radically different from one generation to the next. Another severe difference, a major decrease in teens, is the belief in God. So listen, patriotism, that's a big deal. Not as big a deal as the belief in God. Understand what can occur. If you don't have the belief in God, what is shaping your actions, your morals, your values, your judgment, how you're making decisions? If it's not God, and listen, you know the trouble you got in with a belief in God. So listen, we've had godly principles guide our nation in the midst of really bad decisions. So what's going to happen when there is no godly principles to guide the decision makers? That's the reality of what the future of these teens, that's going to be for our nation. And I qualify as a millennial, and I see how bad it is now that we're one of the biggest voting blocks there is now. So when my generation takes control, I'm worried about it. Because listen, the fruit's going to be produced. You reap what you sow. Your generation sowed a lot of bad things in mine. And so understand, we have to, and it's not your fault. I'm just saying, understand how the generations have worked. Let's blame the baby boomers, really. I just pass it on down. What we really need is a generation that's going to stand in the gap and protect the next, and sacrifice their own good for the good of the next. And so listen, let's keep track of all the generations that are here now. No one has done it. Let's not pretend. No one has done that. And so we need to, but a consequence now is the belief in God is gone. The younger generation, there's not a lot of humility because there's no fear of God. And no one can tell them what to do. Because who's the highest authority that exists? Them. Absolutely. So is that a problem? Yeah. And you need to know about it. This is another decrease, and it shouldn't really surprise us. The value of children. Teenagers, millennials, they don't value children. Well, how could that happen? That's crazy, right? Well, think about what we've been telling them for so many years, what our government has been telling them for so many years, what our court system has been telling them for so many years. What's a fetus? Fetus is a burden. A fetus is a problem. And if you get in the way of me destroying my fetus, you're evil. So when you raise kids in that environment, and they're protesting because they're listening to their teachers and they're doing the marches that say you should have the right to destroy. Well, why would they value children? In fact, this was in today's news, actually this morning. 1,400 teens have taken a pledge to have no children. 1,400 teens have taken a pledge to have no children until the government addresses global warming. Understand where their values are. That they're willing to sacrifice children because children don't mean anything. And so they're willing to say, I'll get rid of it. We will all sign a pledge. Do you think they desire to have children very much? Not at all. And what's important to them has been misplaced. Reading that article specifically, just previously, Dr. Jennings was talking about reasoning and things like that. And the heart of this no child protest is behind the whole global warming idea that if the world goes outside of the whatever degrees of warming. And what the kids don't know is the global warming and global cooling has always taken place, and it always will. And this is what's interesting. Who's the authority in their life? The government. Because there is no belief in God. And so who needs to fix the problems? The government. Who do they look to? The government. And the government's opinion changes with the wind. Yet that's what their grounding is for authority. So the value of children, which is going to connect then to the value of family, is radically being decreased. And if you're like, oh, those bad teens, understand, most of them do not have great family experiences because of the generations before. Their parents did not sacrifice for those children. Therefore, why would they sacrifice for their children, and so on and so forth. And there's also a decrease in the importance of hard work. There's no consequences in that one, right? What happens when a nation doesn't work hard? We cease to be the nation that we are. And so we see all those things decreasing, but there are some increases. And a key increase in teenagers, in millennials, is the desire for self-fulfillment. Anyone surprised? So check it out. If you're patriotic, if you believe in this country, you're willing to sacrifice for the country. Correct? All right. If you believe in God, you're willing to sacrifice something of yourself for God. If you have kids, you have to sacrifice something of yourself for God. What do teenagers not want to do? They don't want to sacrifice anything. But they do want to focus on self. But they don't want to work hard. They want things given to them. Because it's about me. It's about I. It's about what I want. And this is a direct consequence of that. Well, first off, it's ironic. Focusing on self-fulfillment. If you focus on self, you will not have fulfillment. Just so you know. you need to serve. You need to love. But here's the problem with selfishness, which is, I would say, something that would label my generation, the teenage generation, and I don't think it's going to get better until we change. Understand the problem of selfishness is this is what is connected to it directly. It's unhappiness, loneliness, anxiety, and depression. That's the lot for selfish people. Understand, study after study after study. You focus on self, you're going to have these problems. And so if you don't believe that, I'm gonna give you a stat from Blue Cross Blue Shield. So they've released some stats. They don't get too specific, but they do give you percentages on diagnosis. And since 2013, the diagnosis of major depression for millennials, that's my generation, is up 47%. 47%. So let's get to teenagers. The diagnosis of depression for boys is up 47% since 2013. And remember, we're figuring everything out, right? We're giving them everything that they could possibly want, right? Why aren't they happy? Teen girls, the percentage is up 65%. This is clinically diagnosed depression in the generation that has everything at its fingertips. Why are they, and they're encouraged to focus on self and make it about them, why aren't they happy? You can't be when you're selfish. And you absolutely will not be fulfilled. You can be on social media all that you want. And what is social media? It's media about yourself. It's Facebook about your face. Understand it. It's about you. It's about your likes. It's about your image. And that's what these kids are locked in. And you shouldn't be surprised that they're so miserable. So do I have time? Yeah. I'm going to do a little rabbit trail. Okay. So just so you get a vision a little bit of what teenage, the environment is, let's just go to high school essentially. When we were in high school, when I was in high school anyway, we had social interaction where we'd be in the hallways or at lunch or whatever it may be, and there was a desire to impress. That was absolutely there. And so we manifest that in different ways, and some of us were worse than others at it, but we would have this desire in those moments to impress. For me, it was really easy. I wasn't into the talking and socializing, but I clicked in a mode where I was going to impress. And for me, that was just in the hallway. If there was a pretty girl, I would do the cool walk. Where I was just like, pretty girl, and I go into it, boom. And I got the walk, and it's just like, yeah. And you know what? I would have to do that several times in a day, and there's this pressure. Got to walk cool. She's going to like this. It's just, so I have my cool walk, and she goes around the corner. Okay, I can walk normal. But for that moment, pressure of having to be something. And we all, again, manifested in different ways. I was a cool walker. That's what I did. It did not work very successfully, but that's what I did. I'd leave, I'd go home, and the pressure, I wasn't walking cool for my brother. I wasn't going by mom and dad's room. Yeah, hey, I wasn't trying to impress anybody. The pressure's gone. It's released until you go back the next day and you go back. And so what has changed today, and specifically with the smartphone era and social media the way that it is, when does the pressure leave? It never does. And the interconnectedness would probably blow your mind if you're looking at average teenage stats for how long they're engaged. And listen, if you have a child, get the phone out of their bedroom. Please get the phone out of their bedroom. Because that connection is non-stop. And what it does to your brain when you're constantly having to go back and check and update, and your moods are impacted by how many likes and comments you receive. And death by comparison is real, where you're constantly comparing an ideal of what someone is to what you are not. And this is why they could look so good for all their friends, but they know that's not the real them, and it always leads to the same place. And so this connectiveness that can be so good and so positive is leading to a lower self-esteem, loneliness, anxiety, and depression for generations now. Now we're at multiple generations suffering from this. The later generations, you're late on board and maybe that won't have as much of an impact, but listen, this is 24/7 for these students. And the battle is real. So that's just what we can get out of one survey of understanding the differences in just the generation gap and seeing what this technology connectivity can be, or how dangerous this can be when we get this out of control. So here's a real danger. If all Americans were once united by God, family, and country, what happens when that's not the case anymore? So you can go through history. Listen, there's serious political differences, but the Republicans and the Democrats could always come together because God was real, because this country was special, and because family mattered. What do we do when that's not the case? Yeah, you do what's right in your own eyes. And listen, it's when you look at party turmoil, they also did these stats for political parties. And if you're an older Democrat versus a younger Democrat, astronomically different. Where the millennials in the Democratic Party want nothing to do with God. Nothing. What happens when they gain control? So understand, there's dangers when we take our children's education for granted. When we're not teaching, the Bible constantly in the Old Testament, read it over and over, train up the kids in the way that they should go. And we haven't done it. And so there's consequences when that is the case. So teens have a lot of amazing things. Twitter mob justice. So we had that, so make sure you know about that. Twitter mob justice, which is turned everyone in America into judges. And they all judge instantly, and they're out for blood. And this is what's scary. Businesses, almost every major business caters to it. Because the stock market matters. And listen, we're being ruled, major decision makers, which includes politicians, are basing decisions on a Twitter mob of a whole bunch of brave, faceless individuals in their basement. Right? The latest poll is changing policy. It's created this instant gratification, that there's no desire to seek truth. They just want blood. That's what we're creating. That's the norm. And you don't get what you want, let's protest and break things. Yeah. That's part of the teen culture. And so all of this is going to lead to an end of civility and a rise of hate. So, and it's not hopeless, but understand this is I'm just giving you a snapshot of where the teen culture is. This also goes into the college campuses. So just so you guys know, This is, I'll read from this, but it lines up with my experience in college, where there was a time I was told that Christians are the greatest threat to America. Specifically me was the target of my professor, saying that Christians are the greatest threat of America. And so now, years past, I'm going to read from something that was on many college campuses recently, and it was, posters went out, and it was addressing the issue of Christian privilege. And it has a picture of a cross, a picture of the 25th, and then it says this: if you can expect time off from work to celebrate your religious holidays, you have Christian privilege. And it also calls out white people, males, cisgendered people, which if you need to Google the term, it means you're of one gender. So you have privilege if you're only one gendered, or if you're able-bodied, or if you have the audacity of being heterosexual. You all have a privilege problem. And listen, this goes for Christians' education as well. This is a professor. This is a professor who has a master's in divinity and theology. I'm going to let you go through one of the courses that he offers. I'm going to read some of the things. This is, again, a professor with a master's of divinity and theology. This is what he says: how do Christians in the USA experience life in an easier way than non-Christians? That's his first statement. Even with the separation of church and state, there are places where Christians have built-in advantages over non-Christians. How do we celebrate Christian identities and acknowledge that Christians receive unmerited perks from institutions and systems all across our country? This seems very pro-Christian. Not at all. It's an anti-Christian environment. Let's reflect upon the ways we can live up to our personal and national values that make room for all religions and secular attitudes on an equal playing field. Participants in this course will be able to describe what is meant by privilege overall and white privilege specifically. Participants will be able to describe the role of denial when it comes to Christian and white privilege. Because, of course, if you're ever addressed that you are this, if someone says you're Christian privilege and that's you, you're going to deny it. And so you must accept that whoever you address will deny it because they don't know any better. And that is what they're teaching. Participants will be able to list at least 3 examples of Christian privilege. Participants will be able to make a list of at least 3 ways they can be an ally of non-Christian people. The key terminology for the class is to understand privilege, Christian privilege, denial, equality, Christianity bias, unconscious bias, and microaggression. That's offered by a Christian professor from a campus about 2 hours from here. So that's the environment that if you want to be a teenager and a Christian today, that's what your professors think of you. You know, of course, that also says all are welcome. Right? That felt very welcoming to Christians. And as they literally do an entire class about what is evil about Christians in our culture. And of course, when that is your focus, then who have you demonized? It's Christians and Christianity, and yet you're preaching tolerance and you don't know what the word means. You know, and this is true of all teens, they love the idea of tolerance. Going back to that same survey, tolerance is ranked much higher than the older generations. But it's a false tolerance. Their version of tolerance is I identify you as intolerant, so I can't tolerate you. I made that judgment not based on information, on the feeling that I have right now, and you are intolerant, and then whatever Nazi, homophobic, like they'll throw any insult to label you and justify it in the name of tolerance. Correct. And you don't deserve any other treatment because you're dangerous. And that's what every kind of corrupt regime has always said. They are the knight in shining armor. But look under the armor, and you'll find truth. So the teens aren't real good at that. They're terrible at critical thinking. They don't know how to reason, and they don't have good judgment. Which, as opposed to when you guys were all teenagers, right? You had good judgment and good reasoning and good critical thinking. So I think this may have been a generational issue, but hopefully the culture as a whole, it takes a community to raise up one good American, right? And it should. And so that means when you struggle with reasoning and you struggle with logic and you struggle with the critical thinking, that there's a community that can help you and steer you in the right direction. Let me tell you that community is shrinking. And that's what we're being confronted with. I'll just give you one more example. Over the past year, I've had multiple opportunities to talk about Jesus in a non-Christian venue with teens. And it's been really nice, and something that we do to encourage critical thinking is in youth group, we call it Question Everything Month, where we're just constantly questioning, because I want them not to believe it because I said it. Because if you're that kind of person, as soon as the professor tells you something different, you're done. So we need you to know why you believe what you believe. But it gives me the opportunity to go in with non-Christian teens and, one, find out what they're thinking, what's on their mind, and then two, be able to see why do they believe what they believe. And just so you guys know, if you want to minister to non-Christians, you need to be able to talk about drugs, sex, and homosexuality. So those, every time I meet with the teens, it's the same questions come up. And they know I'm a pastor, so of course those are the hot button issues, and we address them very consistently. But what is a constant is that when I question them, they have no idea why they believe what they believe. That means their foundation of truth is on nothing. On nothing at all. Yet that doesn't stop them from acting on it. And that's what's so scary about this generation. They boldly know nothing. Right? And they're proud of it. They will act on it strongly, and there is no foundation of truth. But let's flip this to the positive, that it actually is. If they have no foundation of truth, you know what can have great power in their life? Truth. Where can we find that? We have it, right? That's us. And so it's been so powerful when I get to go in. It's like, you haven't thought about this? All right. You know, this is what the Bible says. They're like, what? And we ask a question, and then stuff just blows their mind because it's areas that they've never experienced real truth, and teenagers are desperate for it. So listen, I'm telling you what the state of the culture is. They don't enjoy it there. And they have to, and this is the problem with social media, you have to put up the front as if everything's okay. And so they'll put the pressure to look a certain way, they feel it, and they have to look this way, but I'm telling you, they are miserable because they don't have access to truth. A lot of them have no clue anything about the truth that Jesus offers. And so to be able to go and share it with them, it's powerful. There's a real harvest out there. The only thing Jesus needs is workers. And that's how the generation's going to change. We got to have a generation that says sacrificing for another generation is worth it. And that's our history. That's American history. So hopefully that can be our part of it. And if not, listen, it's going to get worse. Things don't fix themselves without people sacrificing for it. So there is no easy way out. There is no way you can be unaccountable for this. It's on us. So we have the opportunity to influence. So overall, it's encouraging because God put us here for such a time as this. So, all right, pass it along.
Thank you, Pastor Andrew. And next, we're going to be hearing from Pastor John Betts of Abundant Life Church in Georgetown. I have a great deal of respect for Pastor John, and I always enjoy hearing what he has to say. And every time that I get an opportunity to hear him, I always walk away refreshed and encouraged. So I hope that as he comes this evening, you also will be able to leave this evening from time with him refreshed and encouraged.
Thank you. I wanted to put on my walk as they came up, but I refrained myself. I didn't have anybody to impress. Good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you. You ever ask this question to somebody? What were you thinking? What were you thinking? How did you find that as a possibility to make that decision? What were you thinking? And if you're a pastor, you deal with people. We all deal with people. But when people come in, you think, what? How did they come to the thinking and the decisions that they make? Andrew was just sharing with us about young people, giving us an idea of how they come to the place that they think the way that they do. They're a result of choices of people that came before them. And so we need to address them not as guilty parties, but as ignorant parties. They don't know what they're doing. That's what Jesus said on the cross, isn't it? They don't know what they're doing. You think, wait a minute, they schemed, they bribed, they lied, they prepared, they put pressure on Pilate. They didn't know what they were doing? No. They didn't know what they were doing. So we need to give them a little bit of a break. So every person has foundational thoughts. They do think. Sometimes you don't think they're thinking, but they have foundational thoughts. We all have a foundation of thinking that we collect over our lifetimes. And once we have those foundational thoughts, they act as truths for our lives. They become the truths that we live by, that we act on. And so if somebody comes to us and they need help, one of the things we have to do is we have to try to discover what are those truths that they live by. Because they're true to them, but they're not the truth. And so, I love Teen Challenge. And the reason I do is because when Teen Challenge gets you, they won't let you go. For how long, Bob, to graduate the program? 12 months. Why do you keep people away from their families, away from their friends for 12 months? Because if you don't, they don't change their thoughts. If they go to detox, get off the drugs, and go right back where they came from, the same truths are in that group of people that they lived by before, and they'll go right back to acting the way they did before. You have to take them out of the environment where the thoughts are, the foundational thoughts that allowed them to get to where they were, and form a new environment, a new set of thoughts, new truths to replace the old for them to have a chance not to return to the dog's vomit they came from. Are you all with me? So, we collect these foundational thoughts from our relationships and our experiences. From our relationships and our experiences. These foundational thoughts are so ingrained that they're hidden. We don't even know they're there. They're just the way we are. Now, in Isaiah 53, verse 5, there's a scripture that says, He was wounded for our transgressions, He was bruised for our iniquities, the chastisement of our peace was upon Him, and by His stripes we are healed. One day, as I was sitting, thinking, meditating, I don't know what was going on, the question popped into my heart, my mind. I didn't think it out loud, it just came, what's the difference between sin and iniquity? And I didn't know. You ask people, what is transgression? What is sin? What is iniquity? Oh, it's sin, because He forgives our sins and iniquities. It's kind of group them together. Well, if He grouped them together and they're the same thing, then why did He have two different categories in Isaiah 53:5? Was wounded for our sins. Now, what's a sin? A sin is when you look the other way to see if anybody's looking before you do it. You know it's wrong. You know you're breaking a rule. And so sin is a transgression of a known rule. I know what I'm doing. Iniquity is what you don't know you're doing. You don't know. I looked it up. It means perverse or out of order, not the way things should be. And it comes from a root word that means to crook or to bend. Have you ever heard somebody say, he has a certain bent about him? He has a certain way about him? Iniquity is that bent or that crook, the way that you do things. And it's a way of thinking. You know, there's another verse in the Bible, I think, that says, every man's way is right in his own eyes. Every man's way, every man's iniquity, every man's way of handling life. See, iniquity is thinking of how you handle life. Families have iniquities. It says in the Bible that not that the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children, but it's the iniquities of the fathers that are visited upon the children. So families act alike. So you could say all those Bettses, they just act alike. They're all alike. All those Joneses, they're just all alike. Marvin and his brothers, they're all alike. Families have traits. They have ways. They have things that they do that you can almost predict it because it's the way the family acts. It's how they handle life. So somebody grows up in the house and their father's an alcoholic, and what do they say? I'll never marry an alcoholic. And they don't marry an alcoholic. But then they become an alcoholic. How's that happen? Because in the realm of iniquity, they find somebody that matches. And next thing you know, they're with an alcoholic. They didn't want to be with an alcoholic, but it's happened. So, true story. Jimmy and Susie, they're going through premarital counseling. And so they come for their regular premarital counseling session. This isn't somebody I counsel. It's not in this area, and the names have been changed to protect the guilty. But it's a true story. They come to the session, and Susie says, Pastor, we got a problem. Oh, really? What's the problem? Well, Jimmy's been smacking me around. He said, that is a problem. And she says, I know. That's not supposed to happen until after we're married. Okay, now, see, what happened is that you all don't think that way. But they both thought that way. She didn't have a problem with being smacked around. She had a problem that it started too soon. So now, where does that come from? It comes from family environments where that's normal. And so it was okay with her to find a husband who's going to smack her around after they get married, but don't start before we get married. That's just breaking the rules. But they neither one had a problem with him smacking her around. That was to be expected. Well, when the pastor found that out, then he had the opportunity to deal with and help both families to change that way of thinking, because both of those families would have told you that spousal abuse was wrong. But they didn't consider that spousal abuse. That was normal relationship. That's iniquity. That's a way of thinking that when you don't have that way of thinking, you see it very, very clearly, and they didn't see it at all. So he was wounded for the things we can see. He was bruised for the things we don't know are wrong, because for us it's okay. The chastisement of our peace to deal with anxiety and shame was upon him, so he takes care of the inside of us, the soul, the mind, the will, the emotions, and then by his stripes we're healed. So he takes care of the things we did. He takes care of the things we don't know we did. He takes care of what's on the inside of us, and then he heals our body. He took care of the whole package. But I want to focus on, talk a little more on the iniquity side of things. What were you thinking? Smacking her around. Well, it's just what we do. What were you thinking when you made that decision? Well, we don't do that around here. Well, we don't. You used a substance to handle life. It was alcohol. I just chose to do drugs. Same issue. I'm just doing a different thing, but using the same process. So a family has an alcoholic father and a drug addict son, and then he has a baby that's born that's got drug problems. Generationally, the same iniquity manifests in different ways because the thinking hasn't changed. They've never taken responsibility for the problem. And you deal with them and you think, okay, we'll just repent and say you're sorry and it's over with. No, it's not over with. It's not done yet. Because they haven't really ever been transformed. They've just had restraint applied. You see, you can have restraint applied, and I call that sin management. We're not in the sin management business. We're in the reconciliation and restoration business, where it's transformed, and you're not always having to fend off the thing and guard against it because you have a new mind. If a guy leaves Teen Challenge after a year and he's still struggling, he never really got the mindset yet. But he has to resist whenever the temptation comes. But he's empowered to do that if he thinks right. Right, Bob? And we have to do the same thing. Well, see, I talk about Teen Challenge. Well, what about your challenges? Maybe you have Adult Challenge. You just never been in a program. Well, you're in the program. Well, we're at war with an enemy that wants to destroy our thinking, so we do stuff just like what he was talking about a while ago. And God's made a provision so that a whole generation can be saved. They got a void in there that if we present ourselves and present the truth, they'll be saved. But there's a generation of us that we haven't changed everything that is wrong with us yet. We haven't embraced it because we think every man's way is right in his own eyes. So I'm saved. I may be filled with the Spirit or whatever, but I'm right. You got some problems, but I'm good. You know, there are religiously Bible-based iniquities at work in the church. Did I say it again? Bible-based iniquities. That's one group that knows they're right and everybody else is wrong. That's iniquity. God's not saying, point out the people that are wrong because you're right, you're my favorite. But they are. That's wrong thinking. But they've got a cloistered religious thinking that gives them permission to judge everybody else as wrong. So that's a biblically based iniquity. Iniquities show up in many different ways. If you just think looks like sin, then it's just got to be bad stuff. No, it's not just bad stuff. It's wrong stuff. It's wrong stuff. It opposes God. I'll give you a flavor of my testimony in case you haven't heard it, is that I got born again. I was the first one born again in the family. Rick got saved. My mom got saved. We were an upstanding family in the community. My grandfather was a director at the bank, and they were on the board at the church. We were upstanding in the community. I don't know anything in the community would say anything against us. I got saved. My brother got saved. My mother got saved. And then my dad had a family meeting because he had fanatics in his house. See, what we were doing wasn't Betts-like for him. And he wanted it calmed down. That was a Betts iniquity that I couldn't have called it that back then. Dad's just not happy that we're saved. No, it was the Betts iniquity opposing what was going on in the kingdom of God in the house. So iniquity doesn't always look wicked, evil, or dirty. It's just wrong, and it opposes what God wants to do in your life. So, how did I start this off? What were you thinking? What were you thinking? Until you discover the foundational iniquities, thinking transformation is delayed. So you have to help people where they are. Sometimes you can take them right to, some help managing their situation. They got to start off with some management tools possibly. But the goal is to help them see what the real issue is. If you don't get to the real issue, you'll be revisiting the same thing again. And so you may not see it right because the problem with you is that you think you're right too. And so you've got to even lay aside your own preconceived biases as what they need because you have to help them discover what they really need. And it can't always be told. They have to find it. Seek me and you will find me when you search for me. We think if we tell them, they got it. No, they didn't get it. I'll tell you right now, they didn't get it. I preached it, they should have got it. No, they didn't get it. If they're not transformed by the renewing of their mind, they didn't get it. It takes revelation, information turned into revelation, which brings transformation from the inside, not imposition from the outside. You can't force it on anybody. You think I had 2 conversations with them. Well, they should have it by now. No, they didn't get it because they still think like they used to think. They haven't been transformed till they've had an encounter with truth. And the encounter with truth will make them free. Encounters with you may make them frustrated. Or they'll try to be better for you. But it doesn't work till there's transformation. Romans 12:2. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing. Sweep out the iniquity. He forgives our iniquities, but we have to work at getting rid of them. Ron, we got to get truth to replace the stuff that somebody gave us that didn't come from God. Not everything you know came from God. That's the problem. If it didn't have its foundation in God, it opposes God at some point. So, a young girl gets abused by a male family member. What does she think? What becomes true to her? Men will. Is that true? But is it a truth that she can apply to her experience and then live out of that truth? Okay? She may not have a clue that she's doing that. And then she has a desire to get married. And she gets married. But she marries a man. And men will hurt you. And so at some point, it becomes a problem because he doesn't know what's wrong. He feels accused. He feels rejected. He doesn't, what did I do? You didn't do anything. Well, then what's wrong? I don't know. But there's a distance that has to be covered because she's living by a truth that happened from an experience that became an iniquity that now opposes him and the love she needs. And she doesn't have a clue what's wrong. Neither does he. But it's a truth that didn't come from God. That has to be replaced. And if you know the truth will make you. So, a young girl is molested, abused by a female family member. What does that do? She's got this experience now, has some ramifications in her thinking. Well, I guess this is better than having a man. Maybe this is what I am or who I am. And then a young man pays attention to her, but she's conflicted. Because society says it'd be right to marry a man, but her experience says women will treat you good. And she gets married to the man. She has some children, but then there's a lady at work that she's kind to her, she's nice to her, not necessarily trying to do anything, but next thing you know, she has feelings because she goes back to the thought that became a truth out of the experience that has nothing to do with truth. It has everything to do with a wrong experience, that she drew a wrong conclusion because she didn't have the information to make the right conclusion out of the experience she had. And it shows up years later, and then they wind up in marital counseling. But they never talk about the real problem because she doesn't know the real problem. Talk about, well, he doesn't treat me this way, or she says this or does that, but they don't ever get to the real issue that she's confused because of an experience that now is manifesting itself in their relationship, and the truth needs to set her free, but uncovering the problem is the challenge. And so they can go to counseling for years and then get divorced and not know why they're divorced because they never got to the iniquity that was causing her to not be able to fully invest herself in the relationship. And it was an abusive thing that happened years ago. Okay, that's what iniquity does. You don't even know you're doing it. Now, he came to forgive what we know we do, to forgive what we don't know we do, to heal the brokenness on the inside of us, the shame, the fear, the anxiety, and he came to heal our bodies. He came to fix everything. There's an answer for everything in Jesus Christ. Amen. That's right. He left nothing out. But I was here to talk to you tonight. This wasn't my assignment. This is just what I get to give you. To talk to you about iniquity, and whenever I had to look it up, I had no clue what it was. Had no clue what it was. But I think it's one of the most important things I ever learned. Because it's a framework to look at things in a way that say, okay, I can see there's something different working here than I know about. And until we find that out, we won't be able to find the answer. We'll patch it up. Well, I'll do better, Pastor. I won't lose my temper. But rage comes out again. At the wrong times, and nobody knows why. Because the real source has never been addressed. The conclusion from an experience. The thinking in the family that was caught, not taught. The natural way that we all do things, which now becomes the right way to do things. So when I get married as a Betts to my wife Alice, who's a Hart, it's her job to become a Betts. And that's what you teach, right, in counseling? The wife becomes, she takes my name, she ought to be like me. Make me happy. Is it working, Andrew? No, that's iniquity. To place that demand on somebody else. You see, why do we need to love each other? Because we are different. And we don't see things the same way. So we need to have grace and mercy and love somebody, not because they're wrong. Their way is just a little different getting to you than your way getting to them was. So, deal with iniquity, find the problem, and then you'll help people get the answer.
Thank you, Pastor John. Well, I really enjoyed listening to both Pastor Andrew and Pastor John this evening. I hope you did too, and I hope that it'll help to shape your ministry going forward.